I never imagined my own son's wedding would be the moment I went from mother to museum piece. The champagne flute in my hand was still cold when Lena, my son's new bride, turned to the waiter and said loud enough for 3 tables to catch it, "The help eats in the kitchen." She didn't glance at me, just flicked her eyes toward Sharon, my assistant for more than 3 decades, and then past her. Through me, like I wasn't even part of the decor. A few guests chuckled nervously. Some looked away. Evan, my only child. My boy adjusted his cufflinks and kept right on talking to Lena's cousin about venture capital and passive returns. Sharon met my eyes briefly. Her face didn't flinch. I gave the tiniest nod. It wasn't the first slight of the evening. My name card had read, Irene Whitaker, no title, no honor. Not mother of the groom. My usual brute was nowhere in sight, replaced with Lena's trendy, sustainable rosé. I'd been seated 2 rows back during the ceremony. A Peloton instructor made the front row. But that comment, that was the turning point. I set my untouched glass down on the table, reached into my clutch, and walked quietly, not dramatically, behind the trellis wall near the garden. Lavender bushes swayed gently. The string quartet played a jazzy rendition of Coldplay. Fitting, I called Martin. He picked up on the second ring. "Cancel the $30 million transfer," I said. My voice was level, surgical. Silence. Then, "You're sure, Irene?" "I am. It was mine to give. It's now mine to keep." He didn't question it. Never does. "Understood. I'll notify the board." I ended the call. Nearby a rose drooped in the heat. I plucked it gently. The bloom had been flawless once, but beauty fades and usefulness expires. Back at the table, Sharon sat composed, her glass full but untouched. She rose slightly as I approached. "You!" We both sat. Then the toast began. Evan tapped his glass, flashing that perfect smile under the fairy lights. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," he said. "Especially my mother, Irene Whitaker, who—" He paused. The name fell like a lead weight. He'd expected applause. There was only silence. Even the quartet stopped playing. I tilted my head, just enough to catch his eyes. He blinked, cleared his throat, continued. "Who helped make this day possible?" Helped. Past tense. My son. The boy who once climbed into my bed after nightmares now looked through me like I was air. Lena clutched his arm, radiant in her sequined dress. She smiled like a woman who'd won something. The toast stumbled on. Jokes, applause, a clink of glass. But the air had shifted. Mrs. Harding, seated near the fountain, didn't even hide her smirk. She leaned toward a young man, probably Lena's godbrother, and whispered something behind her napkin. He looked at me, just briefly. Good, let them whisper. They didn't know it yet, but they would. By dessert, that morning, before the insult, before the toast, before the wound, I debated wearing the silver locket Evan made in the 3rd grade. A heart, slightly dented. Inside, a photo of us, him missing a front tooth. Me in a scarf, smiling, standing by the very same fountain where he'd just said vows. I left it in the drawer, not because I didn't love him, but because I suspected deep down he didn't need me anymore. Not really, not unless I came with dollar signs. The reception lingered like a perfume past its welcome rosé-soaked laughter, the scraping of heels across flagstone, and Evan's voice echoing as he worked the crowd like a politician. He didn't look for me. Of course he didn't. Back at the estate's main house, Sharon walked 3 steps behind me as always. Not because she had to, but because that's how she protected me. We reached the back hallway quiet and unclaimed by decorators. The silence made room for truth. In my study, I peeled off my gloves and sat at my desk, the same oak desk I'd used to design the first Sinclair show home back in '87. I pulled open the file drawer. The binder was thick leather bound. My life in contracts. Within it, clauses that could birth or bury fortunes. Evan's name appeared in too many places. I'd already removed him from the announcement fund, but now it was time to dig deeper. I flipped to the section labeled Succession and Discretionary Control. It was everything. Power without ownership. Access to every vault, every vote, every executive decision. I called Martin. Addendum to the estate trust, I said. Effective immediately. Evan is to be stripped of all discretionary power. If a florist invoice crosses his desk, I want it rerouted. Martin didn't skip a beat. And the reasoning, breach of trust, I said, both in spirit and substance. He understood. Martin always does. It'll be filed before midnight. I exhaled, the kind of breath you only take when you've been holding a decade in your lungs. People assume silence means surrender. It doesn't. Sometimes it's strategy. And sometimes it's the sound of the roots pulling back. By sundown, the wedding was dying its pretty death. The DJ had moved to overplayed classics, the crowd had thinned, and the bar had reopened. Evan circled the patio, still grinning, still shaking hands with men who used to take my calls first. Lena. She posed for photos beside the custom cake teeth, flashing like it was a press event. She caught my eye once. Her smile faltered. Not because she knew. Not yet. But because she sensed it. Like an animal feels a tremor long before the quake. Sharon approached with her usual quiet step, holding a linen folder. Guest list, she said simply. Marked for who acknowledged you and who didn't. I glanced down. There were checks, asterisks, and one handwritten note at the bottom. Mrs. Harding brought a gift, the original blueprint of the Whitaker estate. Said, you might want to remember who built the house they're trying to inherit. I smiled. Not the kind you give for pictures. The kind that means you've remembered where the firewood is kept. The next morning, I dressed with intention, charcoal suit, no jewelry. Clean lines, soft heels. I wasn't dressing for war. I was dressing to reclaim the tools of architecture. By 10:00 a.m., Sharon and I stood in front of the family vault. Elaine, Lena's assistant, had taken heirloom items without permission. The security footage showed it plainly. Should I call the police? Sharon asked. No, I said. Let me show you how a matriarch works. We entered the bridal suite with formality. Lena, in her silk robe and wedding curls, looked up from her espresso. Irene, she chirped, false sweet. What a surprise. We're just finishing up photos. I've come for my family's heirlooms, I said calmly. Confusion flickered across her face, then indignation. You approved this, she said. I did not. Her voice tightened. We're not done shooting. Sharon stepped forward and opened a velvet pouch. Empty. Waiting. You can return them now, she said coolly. Or explain to the press why you kept them. It was quiet enough to hear a champagne cork pop 2 rooms away. Slowly, Lena removed the sapphire ring, then the ivory comb. Her fingers shook, but her jaw clenched. She placed them in Sharon's palm like they were poison. In the car, I slid the ring back onto my finger. My grandmother's ring. It was cool and familiar, like placing your hand on solid stone. She thought wearing it made her part of the story, I said. Sharon's reply was sharp and soft. She forgot who wrote it. Later that night, the vault was recatalogued. Every comb, brooch, and necklace sealed, stored, and guarded by new codes. No longer for display. No longer for them. Until someone earns the right, Sharon said. She meant it. I took the ring off, placed it gently into a silk-lined drawer. I didn't need it to feel powerful. Not anymore. Because the real inheritance was never the jewelry. It was the name. And they would never wear it properly again. It began with a spreadsheet. Not a confrontation. Not a scream. Just a spreadsheet. The email subject line read, Final Registry Confirmation. Transfers and acknowledgments attached. Was a pristine Excel file with 38 entries. Each line was a transaction lavish and audacious. $10,000 travel fund. $7,500 toward a furniture suite imported from Italy. A $14,200 art commission. A couples retreat in Lake Como listed at $18,800. All allegedly gifted by one person, Margaret Irene Whitaker, mother of the groom. I hadn't authorized a dime. They hadn't asked. They'd assumed. The mistake wasn't in the greed. It was in the arrogance. They believed the legacy I built could be absorbed by name alone. That my signature was ceremonial. That I wouldn't notice or worse, wouldn't care. But I built an empire on details. I know the weight of every zero, and this was embezzlement masked as entitlement. I turned to Sharon. How many of these have been processed? I asked, my voice like polished steel. She scanned the rows with a precision that would shame an auditor. 3 have gone through, she said. The rest are pending. I picked up the phone and called Martin. Immediate freeze on all wedding-related fund transfers. Reason, clerical inconsistencies. He didn't ask questions. It'll be done before sundown, he replied. I didn't need fireworks. I preferred the storm that rumbles just below the horizon. By brunch the next day, the ripples had already reached the edges of their curated world. The event was informal croissants, lavender lemonade flower crowns for Lena's bridesmaids. The kind of gathering that's really a campaign rally in disguise. I stood near the back wall beside the hydrangeas out of the light. The murmurs began near the mimosa bar. I thought they were footing the honeymoon. I heard the travel fund bounced. Didn't she say the Sinclair gift covered the portrait commission? Lena was the first to feel it. Her smile tightened. Her posture straightened. She began scanning the room like a hostess who suddenly realized the oven was never turned on. Evan stood by the fountain laughing too loudly at nothing. His hands kept adjusting the cuffs of a shirt I'd bought him 5 years ago when he couldn't afford shirts that didn't come from an outlet. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. By evening, the wedding coordinator had sent a carefully worded email. "Hi, Ms. Whitaker. Just a quick clarification on some registry items. Several transfers appear delayed. Should we resend the payment details for your convenience? With gratitude, Hannah, on behalf of Lena and Evan." Sharon drafted the reply. "Pending review. Please stand by." Nothing more. Because anything more would have acknowledged them as participants. And they weren't. Not anymore. That night, I reviewed the full registry alone in the library. Every item, every line was a confession. Not just of their entitlement, but of their expectations. A designer luggage set monogrammed L&E. A subscription to an exclusive floral concierge. Custom-framed engagement shots with museum-grade lighting. These weren't gifts. They were demands disguised as gratitude. At the bottom of the list, one item caught my eye. Legacy Donation Fund, Family Benevolence Foundation, $25,000 from M. Whitaker. That one stung. Because I'd been planning something just like it. But now they'd tried to beat me to the press release, to the praise. The next morning, I met with Martin again. No delay, no tea, no small talk. "Cancel the donation," I said. "Redirect the entire wedding expense line into the Whitaker Women's Initiative Fund." He raised an eyebrow. "Understood. And while you're at it," I added, "flag every vendor Lena or Evan contacted in the last 3 months using the Whitaker name. I want it audited, cataloged, and accounted for." "What should I say if they push back?" he asked. I looked him in the eye. "Tell them Margaret isn't funding performance art." By the end of the week, the industry had noticed. It always does. Quiet conversations cropped up among florists, caterers, legacy donors, and even the local magazine Lena had been courting. Didn't the family fund their honeymoon? Why were payments declined? Is Margaret pulling back? Good. Let them speculate. Let them feel the edges of what they mistook for an open checkbook. Because reputation isn't about press. It's about pressure. And I'd stopped holding the weight for people who called it inheritance. It wasn't a ring that changed anything. It was who assumed it would stay gone. The day after the brunch, Sharon entered my sitting room holding a velvet box with gloved hands the way one might carry an artifact or lie. "I had the vault recatalogued," she said. "These were left under bridal collection temporary use." I opened the lid. Inside sat my mother's comb, hand-carved ivory, with fine etching along the edge, and my grandmother's sapphire ring, cool and gleaming even under dim lamplight. The comb still had a single auburn strand caught in the teeth. The ring still smelled faintly of old rosewater. Lena had worn them like a costume, a role she believed came with accessories instead of responsibility. I ran my thumb over the sapphire's face. 3 generations, 3 wars, 3 births, and 2 funerals. This wasn't jewelry. This was lineage. 2 days earlier, Sharon had stood in the bridal suite doorway, a velvet pouch in one hand, unbothered by Lena's theatrics. "You're joking," Lena said, half laughing, half threatening. "We're not even done with photos." Sharon's face didn't move. "Mrs. Whitaker has requested the return of all heirloom items. Immediately." "You can't be serious," she said again, trying to summon that haughty charm she used on junior assistants. "I'll have them cleaned and couriered after the honeymoon." Sharon opened the pouch. She was serious the moment you bypassed her authority to take them. A silence bloomed, heavy, angry, unwelcome. Lena removed the comb from her hair and pulled the ring from her finger like they burned. She placed them in Sharon's open palm without another word. Not because she respected the request, but because even a thief knows when she's been caught. Back in my study, I closed the box and placed it inside the top drawer of my desk. I wasn't angry. I was clear. That's the difference. Anger burns. Clarity endures. I picked up my pen and added a new clause to the heirloom ledger. No item may leave the estate unless formally requested in writing by the matriarch, signed and witnessed. No exceptions. Effective immediately. The following morning, the headlines shifted. Belle Whitaker returns, family heirlooms miscommunication or misstep. Margaret Whitaker steps back from family events amid silence over wedding finances. Legacy interrupted. Are the Whitakers rebranding or unraveling? I didn't give a quote. Silence again said more. At dusk, I returned to the garden. The peonies had bloomed too early, lush and heavy, drooping from their own beauty. I sat on the wrought iron bench where Evan once played with toy soldiers and let the air settle. Sharon approached quietly, a sealed envelope in hand. It was heavy, wax-stamped, and bore no return address. Inside was a note card. Simple ivory with black script. You didn't have to humiliate us. No name, but I didn't need one. The font screamed, Lena. I burned it in the fireplace without a word. Later that evening, I poured a small glass of my husband's favorite port. The bottle we saved for turning points, and sat beneath the portrait of my mother. The ring sat beside my glass, unworn, resting. Let them say I overreacted. Let them say I'm dramatic. Let them say I'm done. Because when a woman reclaims her boundaries, the ones who cross them will always call it betrayal. And I'd rather be betrayed by expectations than by my own silence. They always thought the empire lived in the walls. In the boardroom's marble table, the etched glass doors with the Whitaker crest, the skyline views. But legacy doesn't live in buildings. It lives in what you hide in plain sight. And I had hidden it well. I called it the ghost portfolio. It wasn't a secret, at least not to anyone who bothered to read the fine print. But no one ever did, especially not Evan. He inherited gloss, not grit. For years, I tucked holdings into blind trusts, partial patents, rental properties listed under subsidiaries. A boutique hotel group in Lisbon. Licensing rights for textile designs I created in the early 90s. A dormant furniture line that Lena once earmarked for her relaunch initiative only to forget it existed. Each asset generated modest returns. Not flashy, not headline-worthy, but stable. Consistent, unshakable. Together, they accounted for over 30% of Sinclair Whitaker Design's operating strength. And Evan never once asked where they came from. He thought they were just line items, little miracles made possible by his vision. That week, I began pulling threads. Quietly, strategically. I sold the Lisbon Hotel Group to a private equity firm that respected silence as much as I did. The licensing rights transferred to the Whitaker Women's Initiative. The dormant line rebranded, renamed, and gifted to a nonprofit design school for young women from underserved communities. All signed, sealed, and executed by Friday. By Monday, the company's ledgers were bleeding, and Evan had no idea why. Sharon found me in the library later that afternoon. Martin says Evan called 3 times, she said. Something about portfolio irregularities. Let him stew, I replied, closing my journal. They always notice after the scaffolding's gone. She didn't ask which scaffolding. She didn't need to. She poured my tea and sat across from me. You've always been the architect, she said. They thought I was the wallpaper. That Friday, I received an email from the board chair. We've been informed of a significant shift in the operating portfolio. Please advise on your availability to join an emergency session Monday morning. I replied with one line. Please proceed without me. The scaffolding has moved. That weekend, society began to whisper again. Not with malice, with curiosity. What happened to the golden couple? Why is Margaret shifting assets? Where is Lena? Those who mattered asked gently, with concern. Those who didn't speculated in whispers over cocktails and salmon tartare. One donor at the arts gala even asked Sharon, Is Margaret okay? She smiled politely. She's evolving. I hosted no dinners, held no press conference, made no threats. I simply stopped contributing to conversations that erased me, to legacies that excluded me, to children who inherited my name but forgot my character. And when Evan finally realized what that meant when he stood in front of the board with half his power gone and no explanation that didn't sound like an excuse, it was too late. Because ghosts don't speak to the living, they haunt. It arrived in a plain envelope. No seal, no logo, just a photo. I knew it the moment I saw the edges. Evan, age 23, graduation day. Champagne glass in hand, arms slung around my shoulders like I was a trophy, instead of the woman who paid for every class, every credit, every late-night Uber when he drank too much to walk home. We were both smiling, but I remembered the moment differently. He was tipsy. I was tired. He introduced me as Margaret Whittaker, my benefactor. The photographer had to remind him to say Mom. Taped to the back of the photo was a note in my handwriting from years ago. The last time you looked at me with respect. Sharon found me staring at it in the breakfast room sunlight pouring across the table. Do you want to send it? She asked. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. 2 days later, Evan received the envelope at his office. He didn't call right away. He waited. Waited like a man hoping the silence would dissolve into safety. But silence doesn't fade. It settles. And in settling, it clarifies. That Friday, he showed up at the estate. No Lena. No driver. Just Evan in a wrinkled blazer carrying exhaustion, like it was stitched to his sleeves. I didn't invite him in. We sat beneath the fig tree in the back garden, the same one he used to nap under as a toddler, with fig jam smeared on his cheeks and a twig in his hand, pretending it was a sword. I got your note, he said quietly. I nodded. I deserved it. Silence. You think I don't know? I stood by while she mocked you, that I let her turn your legacy into a marketing pitch. He looked up, eyes red. I hate that version of me, Mom. I didn't respond. Because it wasn't about what he hated. It was about what he tolerated until it cost him. I just wanted to build something, he said. You were someone before the boardroom, I replied. Before the cufflinks and the wine pairings. You were my son. He looked down, hands trembling just enough to betray the mask. I'm not here to ask for money, or access, or even forgiveness. Then why are you here? He hesitated to start over. I smiled soft and sad. No, Evan, you want to rewind. He blinked. There's a difference. I continued. Starting over means walking forward and accepting the wreckage. Rewinding means pretending it didn't happen. He swallowed. I didn't think it mattered that much. And there it was, the fatal miscalculation. You thought legacy was a last name, I said. But legacy is memory, and you let her rewrite mine. He reached into his coat and handed me something. A folded piece of cardstock, glittered, crooked. I opened it. A drawing. Crayons and stickers. Me in an apron holding cookies. Captioned, My mommy is a boss. The O in boss was a heart. I found it in an old drawer, he said. I stared at it, then gently, carefully handed it back. I remember her, I said. But she doesn't live in the same house as the woman you treated like an ATM. So this is it, he asked. No coming back. I stood. It's not about coming back. It's about what you do next. But I won't be there to watch anymore. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I didn't raise a villain, I said. But I did raise a man who thought love was a line of credit. He didn't argue. He left without asking me to stay. And I stood beneath that fig tree until the shadows stretched long across the grass, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not grief, not rage. Release. It dropped on a Tuesday. No leaks, no PR fluff, no sources close to the family. Just a plain press release emailed to every major media outlet with one crisp headline. Final statement from Margaret Maggie Whittaker on the future of Whittaker Design Holdings. I didn't watch the fallout. I sat on the porch of my lakeside cottage with a warm mug of chamomile, watching a pair of geese skim across the glass-still water. The morning sun caught in their wake like a brushstroke across a canvas. Inside, Sharon was on the phone with Victor. I could hear her murmuring about embargo dates, signature lines, syndication clauses. But I didn't need to be in the room anymore. I'd already said what needed saying. After 4 decades of building a family business, I have chosen to divest fully from Whittaker Design Holdings. I hold no further financial, legal, or advisory ties to the company. This decision was not made in haste, but in clarity. The $30 million previously earmarked for expansion has been redirected to the Whittaker Initiative, a foundation supporting education, housing, and entrepreneurship for women of color. Legacy is not an empire. It is not a surname. It is who keeps your name safe in their mouth when you're not in the room. Maggie Whitaker. That last line, that was for Lena. I never named her. I never needed to. But she would read it, and she'd feel it. Not because it was petty, because it was final. It took less than an hour for the calls to start. Elaine, unflinching as ever, fielded them all. Victor texted me a single word. Done. The headlines were immediate. Whitaker matriarch withdraws from family empire, redirects millions to marginalized women. Maggie Whitaker retires with grace and a statement. Absence of Lena Whitaker in press release sparked speculation. But I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't need to. Silence has gravity when you've earned it. Around noon, Mrs. Davenport's car pulled into my gravel drive. Her driver wore a tuxedo. Her lipstick looked suspiciously fresh for a woman who claimed to just be in the neighborhood. She carried a lemon bar tin older than my second mortgage and perched herself in my porch chair with the same confidence she used to run charity auctions. "You've done it," she said, sighing as she settled her purse. I poured her tea. "You dropped the match without flinching." I sipped mine. "Matches don't scare me. I've walked through the fire." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Zach called me." "Did he?" I didn't look up. "Said he was taking some time away. Belle left last week." I blinked, but I didn't flinch. "Filed for separation," she added. Her lawyers already floating terms like emotional deception and inheritance misrepresentation. I smiled finally. Empty pockets make honest lawyers. Mrs. Davenport laughed loud, unladylike, and fully free. "You always were the sharpest spoon in the drawer." That afternoon, Sharon and I walked our usual loop around the lake. The water sparkled. The air smelled like new earth and distant pine. She asked me what I wanted engraved on the cornerstone of the Whitaker Initiative's first campus. I thought for a moment, then said, "Tell the truth, even if it costs you everything." She wrote it down without blinking. And we walked on. 2 women. 1 legacy. No permission needed. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't dream of Evan. Not the boy with scraped knees and wild hair. Not the man with polished shoes and slippery silence. I dreamed of my own hands stitching, signing, pulling apart what had rotted and reweaving something that could breathe. When I woke, the sheets were cool. The lake outside quiet, and I felt it. The ache had gone. Not pain, not grief, just space. A week passed, then 2. The house at the top of Whitaker Hill, the estate I had built brick by brick, remained untouched. The bridal suite shuttered, the pool drained for maintenance, the hydrangeas wilted from lack of watering. I got word from Victor Bell's attorney had filed to contest portions of the estate under what they called implied promise of inheritance. Victor replied with one line, "There was no promise, only assumptions." The case was dismissed within 72 hours, but assumptions, I've learned, die slow deaths, especially when they're the only thing holding a person together. Sharon came into my study one morning, her laptop open. "Mrs. Davenport forwarded this," she said, tilting the screen toward me. It was a clip just a few seconds from a charity brunch at the gallery. Belle mid-laugh, glass of rosé in hand. "She always wanted control," a woman off camera whispered. "Now she's got silence." The other woman replied, "No empire crumbles like the one built on borrowed names." I didn't smile, not because it wasn't satisfying, but because it was true. Later that afternoon, I went into the archive room. The one Sharon and I had repurposed for the initiative. Rows of boxes, files, press clippings, ledgers, photos. I pulled out one labeled Family Private. Inside, birthday cards, school reports, finger paintings signed Evie in glitter pen, and one Polaroid from the year I opened my first design firm. Evan was 4, sitting cross-legged on my office rug, holding a ruler like a sword, wearing a crown made of paper clips. I held it in my lap for a long time, then slipped it back inside. Legacy isn't made of what you keep. It's made of what you protect. And I had spent too long protecting people who never learned the weight of the word. That evening, Sharon joined me for a glass of wine on the deck. Not Pinot, not Chardonnay, a rich Cabernet thick with memory. She looked out over the lake. "Do you think he regrets it?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "I think he regrets the consequences, not the choices." She nodded slowly. "And Belle, she regrets losing the ladder more than losing the hand that held it." The sun dipped behind the trees, casting everything in gold. "I used to think being needed was the same as being loved," I said. And now I know better. We clinked glasses and let the silence fill in everything they had taken. The estate sat on Whitaker Hill like a monument to selective memory. Once I thought of it as home. Now it reminded me of a dress I'd outgrown still hanging in the back of the closet, kept only out of habit. Sharon and I drove up one morning in late fall. The air was sharp with the scent of turning leaves and rain not yet fallen. I didn't tell her why I wanted to go. She didn't ask. The iron gate clicked open after a pause. Evan must have forgotten to revoke the old access codes. Some things they never bother to change. They assume you'll never come back. Inside it was quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of solitude, but the muffled hush of a space that had stopped breathing. We walked the halls, furniture draped in white sheets, dust dancing in beams of light. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the lemon oil I used on the counters. In the dining room, a crooked frame still hung one of my early sketches dated 1986. The paper yellowed. The ink faded. They never took it down. They never valued it enough to remove it. It was too familiar to discard, too inconvenient to respect. I stepped into the study, the same one where I signed the first client contract, where Evan used to play beneath the desk while I juggled invoices and deadlines. And there it was, the chair. My chair, upholstered in navy wool, scuffed at the corners, but still standing. I ran my fingers across the arms and exhaled. This is where I became someone, I said quietly. Sharon stood at the door watching. And it's where they forgot, I added. Forgot I had a spine. A mind. That I wasn't just scaffolding for their ambition. She stepped closer. They didn't forget Maggie. They ignored. There's a difference. We didn't stay long. I took one item, a small brass paperweight in the shape of an acorn. Evan gave it to me on my 40th birthday. Said, "For your ideas, so they don't blow away." I left the rest. The house wasn't mine anymore. Not legally, not emotionally. It was a hollowed-out archive of entitlement. As we walked back to the car, Sharon turned to me. "Are you sure you're done?" I looked up at the windows, blank, quiet, impassive. "I'm not just done," I said. "I'm free." That night, I placed the acorn on my desk at the cottage. It sat beside a new design sketch. Not for a home, not for a client. For a community center funded by the Whitaker Initiative. A real place. No marble staircases, no chandelier illusions. Just space, and safety, and air. A house that would never forget the hands that built it. The first draft of my final will wasn't written by a lawyer. It was scribbled in the margin of my garden journal next to notes about sun exposure and pruning cycles. Leave something behind that doesn't need a plaque to matter. That line stayed with me, not because I was dying, but because I was for the first time fully living without performance, without apology. Victor arrived that afternoon, files in hand. He always wore gray to meetings like these. Not black, not blue. A neutral tone, the color of unspoken truths. We sat at my new kitchen table, oak sunlit, humble. "I brought everything you asked," he said, setting down a thick folder. "Final revision? No room for interpretation, just clarity." I nodded and reached for my pen. "Have you read it?" he asked. I had, twice. Still, I flipped through one last time. Each clause a carefully crafted brick in a new kind of home, one built not on bloodlines, but boundaries. Evan's name appeared only once. A modest living stipend enough to remind him that dignity was mine to give, not his to expect. The rest, scholarships, seed grants, transitional housing for women over 50 starting over, and a creative arts fund in honor of my late mother who never got the chance to paint professionally because she raised 3 children and a husband who never believed in color. Victor watched me sign. Then he sealed the envelope and pressed it flat with his palm. "Done," he said. "No," I replied, "begun." The next week, a letter arrived, handwritten, the envelope unassuming, postmarked from a town just 2 counties over. It was from Evan. "Dear Mom, I heard about the foundation, the programs, the direction. I won't pretend I understand it all. But I wanted to say, I see it now. I see you. See." That was all. No promises, no apologies. Just one sentence I'd been waiting to hear for decades. I placed the letter in the drawer beside the acorn paperweight. Not as proof, Not as evidence, just as witness. The day the Sinclair Initiative officially launched, I wore navy. Not to echo the past, but to honor it. To carry only the parts of me that still had roots. The ribbon was cut by a 17-year-old named Tasha, a STEM student from a foster system that almost broke her. She wore sneakers and a mismatched suit jacket she borrowed from her guidance counselor. She hugged me after the ceremony. "You built this," she whispered. "No," I said, smiling. "You will." That night, back at the cottage, I sat on the porch with Sharon. The stars were out, the lake still. The silence didn't ache anymore. It rested. She raised her glass toward me. "To the will," she said. "The legal one or the living one?" I asked. She grinned. "Both." And we toasted, not to endings, but to intention. Quiet isn't free. It charges interest, slow and visible compounding. You pay in missed birthdays, in dinners where you smile through grit teeth, in the way your name is replaced by she in rooms where you built the table. In the first weeks after the foundation launched, silence became my currency. Not as retreat, but as design. Every call left unanswered, every door unopened, every polite decline. It was architecture. I was building distance the way I once built homes with precision. They noticed. Victor forwarded me the first article. A mild write-up in Business Homes Weekly. Matriarch Maggie Sinclair steps away from Sinclair Holdings. A shift or a statement? The headline did what I needed. It made people squint. The second article came from The Ledger. Harsher. Curious. Power vacuum at Sinclair founder withdraws amid rumored family rift. It quoted anonymous sources. One of them clearly Bell implied I was battling fatigue. Fatigue. I'd survived 2 recessions, 4 expansions, and a marriage that nearly drowned me. They thought fatigue would be the narrative I'd drown under. Please. But the real cost came not from the press. It came from Evan's second voicemail. "Mom," he said, his voice taut with embarrassment. "Bell's attorney wants to meet. They're calling the asset freeze questionable." He paused. "You said the house would be ours one day." There it was. The one day they all counted on. The imaginary promissory note they never asked me to sign because they assumed I'd already had. I didn't return the call. Instead, I sent Victor a message: revoke Bell's informal access to estate properties. Remove guest house code. Notify security. He replied within the hour. Done. That same week, Sharon dropped by. She brought soup, vegetable barley, my favorite. We sat in my small kitchen, the kind of kitchen you live in, not pose for photos in. I heard she said, not looking up from her spoon. "They're upset." I nodded. "They're used to me being quiet," I said. "They just didn't expect the quiet to be final." She set her spoon down and leaned in. "They mistook your grace for surrender." Later that night, I sat at my desk. The acorn paperweight caught the moonlight. The garden outside hummed with end-of-season crickets. And I wrote not a speech, not a press release, but a letter. To myself. To the woman who stayed too long at the table because she thought it was love. I told her she was brave. I told her she didn't imagine it. I told her she was allowed to rewrite the will, not just the legal one, but the emotional one. Because the cost of quiet isn't silence. It's what happens when you let others fill that silence with themselves. And I was done paying. It began with a lawyer's letter. Not from Victor, his paper carried clarity, not drama. This one came on thick ivory stock embossed with gold initials. From Bell's legal counsel, of course. The tone was syrupy with faux concern. "We respectfully request a formal review of estate distribution in light of familial expectations and emotional assurances made in verbal agreements." Verbal agreements, emotional assurances. They wanted to argue that Hope had legal standing. Victor read it twice, then looked at me with that subtle arch of his brow. "They're not suing," he said. "They're circling, testing, seeing if you'll blink." I didn't blink. I barely breathed. "They'll keep circling," I said, until they realize I've already taken off. The next week, a different kind of package arrived. A handwritten card. Simple. No return address, but I knew the slant of that writing. It was Evan. Inside was a photo. Him at 5 wearing a Halloween cape, a lopsided crown made of foil. "Queen Mommy." The caption had read back then, "He insisted I was a queen because you fix everything." And below the photo this time, he'd written, "I didn't know what I was breaking. I just wanted to be part of what you built. I held that photo in my lap for an hour. Not crying, not raging, just reckoning. You see, inheritance isn't a birthright. It's not owed. It's not signed in blood. It's not transferred like debt or furniture. It's earned in presence, in respect and love that shows up when no one else does. And Evan, he stopped showing up years ago. At the foundation's next board meeting, I arrived 10 minutes early. Sharon had prepped the space tea fresh scones, soft light through the blinds. On the agenda, approving 3 new scholarships for displaced caregivers returning to school, a grant to fund a wellness center at a local shelter, and a new line in our bylaws: no family members shall be eligible for board seats unless nominated by a unanimous non-family vote. Unanimous, no loopholes, no charm defenses, no bloodlines to override the work. The motion passed without a whisper of dissent. After the meeting, I walked the garden. Hydrangeas were wilting, but the lavender had pushed back defiantly fragrant. A young intern walked beside me, Tasha, the same girl who'd cut the ribbon months before. "Miss Sinclair," she asked, "do you ever regret not letting them back in?" I smiled. "No, honey," I said, "because forgiveness isn't the same as reinstatement." Later that evening, I added another entry to my journal. Inheritance isn't what you leave behind. It's what you no longer have to explain. It came in the form of an invitation-heavy cardstock cursive script wax seal. Sinclair Design 50-year gala black tie. Downtown at the Metropole. A celebration of legacy. I nearly laughed. I hadn't been part of Sinclair Design for nearly a year now. Not in structure, not in sentiment. But there it was, my name embossed across the top. They wanted the glow of my name without the presence of my person. Elaine found the envelope first. "I take it you're not going?" she said. "Oh, I'll go," I replied, slipping the card back inside the envelope. "But not for them. For the history." She raised one eyebrow. "For the confrontation." "No," I said. "For the closure." The night of the gala was cold, one of those early spring evenings that can't decide between frost or fog. I wore midnight blue matte silk tailored shoulders. No jewelry, just a pin at the collar. A silver magnolia. A quiet symbol. I arrived 5 minutes late. On purpose. Let them settle. Let them wait. Inside, the lighting was soft, the music familiar. Jazz covers of the same Coldplay songs they'd played at Evan's wedding. There were photos on easels projected onto screens, old blueprints, showroom launches, and me, in nearly every frame, standing, smiling, leading. They'd built a museum out of moments they once tried to erase. Evan saw me first. He froze, glass in hand, the same polite horror flickering across his face that I'd seen the day I walked out of the boardroom. Belle didn't look up. Her dress was red. Not the soft kind, the kind that demands spotlight and attention. And yet, even in that room, she was dim, because the spotlight wasn't on her. It never had been. A young associate came up to me, nervous, flushed, eager. "Miss Sinclair," she said, practically breathless. "It's such an honor to meet you. I'm studying interior architecture. Your 1992 modular design on adaptive kitchens changed the way I think about space." I smiled, soft and full. That was one of my favorites. "Do you remember why I built it that way?" "For accessibility," she said immediately. "Post-operative clients, aging in place." I nodded. "You remember the why. That's what makes you dangerous in the best way." She beamed, and I felt something loosen in my ribs. The speech portion began shortly after. Belle stood at the mic, Evan by her side. They spoke of growth, of vision, of continuing Maggie Sinclair's mission. They didn't mention why I wasn't standing with them. They didn't mention the lawsuit they'd quietly dropped last month. They didn't mention the $30 million I redirected away from their hands and into women's futures. But I didn't need them to, because the audience knew. The ones who mattered, they knew. At the end of the night, as coats were collected and centerpieces dismantled, Evan approached me. "I didn't know you'd come," he said. "I know," I answered. There was a long pause. "Was it hard?" he asked, letting go. I looked at him, older, wearier, a man walking through fog that he helped create. "No," I said. "What was hard was pretending you deserved it." I left before the final toast. Outside, the wind had picked up again. It tousled my hair and caught in my coat. And for a moment, I felt untethered. Light. They could keep the building, keep the signage, the board seats, the embossed invites. Because I had something they never would. A legacy that couldn't be rewritten. I hadn't stepped foot in the Sinclair estate in 13 months. Not since I left the keys in a velvet envelope on the foyer table, slipped out before dawn, and told the past it couldn't follow. But today I returned. Not for sentiment, for inventory. Victor had arranged for the final assessment of the property's transfer. The foundation would soon take full ownership, converting the estate into a center for women-led innovation. A different kind of inheritance? Elaine met me at the gate. "You sure about this?" she asked, her voice low, steady. I nodded. "It's not my home anymore," I said. "It's just a building now. A shell." Inside it still looked the same. The marble floor polished to a smug sheen. The chandelier over the grand staircase still missing one crystal. I never replaced it after Evan broke it playing pirate at 7. They never noticed. I always had. The walls were hung with staged photographs now. Evan and Belle, brand shoots, Sinclair style. Not one of me. In the library, I found the leather armchair James had loved, the one I threatened to throw out a dozen times, but never did. I sat in it now. Let the room breathe around me. Elaine stood in the doorway with the inventory list. We went item by item. Paintings, fixtures, personal effects, photographs archived, cataloged, removed. The family crest plaque above the mantel. Gone. The hand-painted wallpaper I designed to be preserved under protective film. Everything that had once screamed wealth now whispered history. When we reached the bedroom, the one that had been mine, then guest, then executive suite, I paused. There, folded on the end of the bed, was the quilt. The one I made the year Evan was born. Pale yellow squares, crooked seams, a burn mark in one corner from the time I dozed off holding tea. I lifted it to my face. It still smelled like lemon and old perfume. I thought they threw this out, I whispered. Elaine said nothing, just stepped forward and gently laid a hand on my shoulder. We stood there a moment, two women who had built, mended, carried. Then I folded the quilt, tucked it under my arm, and turned to go. Downstairs, Victor waited with the deed. The final signature, he said. Once you sign it, belongs to the foundation. Permanently. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name, Margaret Sinclair, in clean, steady ink. Victor exhaled. It's done, he said. Not done, I replied. Redefined. As I left the estate, I didn't look back, because I'd learned something. A house is not a legacy, not even the ones we build with our own hands. Legacies are carried in the people who remember you when you're no longer useful. The house had forgotten me. But I had remembered everything. The press called it a quiet revolution. No cameras, no red ribbon, just a group of women standing at the gates of the newly named Sinclair Center for Design Equity, holding keys that once opened doors they weren't even allowed to knock on. I stood among them unannounced, unseen. Not because I didn't belong, but because I had finally learned the value of presence over recognition. Elaine walked beside me. She carried no clipboard today, just a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and string. What's that? I asked. Your final piece, she replied. From the archive. Inside was a photo. May, age 34, standing in front of our first design studio. Evan on my hip, a roll of blueprints in my hand. My hair was a mess. My eyes were on fire. She'd written one word across the back in her neat cursive, origin. That afternoon, I gave my last official address not to a boardroom, not to a gala crowd, but to a group of young women in the center's courtyard. Design students, survivors, mothers, dreamers, the ones who would take the pieces I left and build entirely new blueprints. People will tell you legacy is a name I began. They'll say it's a family crest, a trust fund, a marble plaque by the door. But here's what I've learned. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what you make possible. They listened not with applause, but with hunger, the kind that drives people to build. When I finished, one young woman raised her hand. Do you miss it? She asked. The company, the family. I thought of Evan's voicemail still unreturned. Belle's Instagram now scrubbed of my initials. The estate now filled with the footsteps of strangers becoming something new. No, I said. I miss the girl who thought she had to earn their love by sacrificing her voice. I smiled, but she's not missing. She just moved. That night, I sat by the lake with a cup of tea. No calls, no questions. Just quiet. And for once, the quiet wasn't something I had to survive. It was something I had chosen. I watched the wind ripple across the water. Not a storm, not destruction, just change. The kind you don't fear, the kind you give as a final gift.